This episode is part 2 of the Molly Bish case. If you haven't already listened to part 1, go back and do that now or this won't make a lot of sense. In part 1, we discussed Molly, the days leading up to her abduction, the aftermath of the search, and the work her family has done not only to find resolution in her case, but to help other families as well. We left off in May of 2003 with a hunter finding what looked to be a torn piece of blue bathing suit, and how that would lead to the discovery of Molly's remains nearly 3 years after she went missing. In this episode, we'll pick up from there and discuss all that has gone into the homicide investigation, the many suspects who have been brought up, and where the case stands as of this recording. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved abduction and murder of Molly Bish, and this is part 2. On Friday, May 16, 2003, the Bish family was told about a potential break in the case. A hunter had been up in the Whiskey Hill area within the Palmer Wildlife Management Area in the town of Palmer. This is the town that Maggie Bish was a teacher in, and it was about 5 miles away from Commons Pond. The observant hunter had been out in the woods when he noticed something that caught his attention. It was a piece of blue fabric, weathered and worn, and it looked like it had been out there for a while. Up closer, it appeared to be multiple pieces of a bathing suit. He contacted police, and you may recall from episode 1 that Molly was last seen in a blue bathing suit and khaki shorts. Molly's mother, Maggie, was teaching at school when she got the call, and she told the papers at the time that she felt like her legs were going to give out beneath her. At the news of the discovery and the police presence in the area, news crews once again converged upon the scene, and the Bish family also made their way down. One reporter, a woman named Kathy Curran, who had covered the case from the get-go, was able to get close enough to be able to record footage of the bathing suit. At the Bish's request, she showed them the video of the bathing suit on the screens in her news van. Both John Sr. and Maggie both felt the suit absolutely looked to be Molly's. It didn't take long for investigators working on Molly's case to suspect this was the suit of the missing lifeguard. They were able to tell that it matched the description, and it was the same manufacturer. One of the first people called out was renowned forensic anthropologist Dr. Anne-Marie Myers out of Boston. In an interview with CBS's 48 Hours, Dr. Myers told Erin Moriarty that upon looking at the suit, she immediately thought it had been out there for roughly 3 years. She said she could tell because of the deadfall, the years of leaves and debris and foliage dropping. She also said she noticed that it had grown into the surface and that roots had come up through it. The discovery of the bathing suit meant there was the possibility that Molly's remains could be found amongst that forest. Despite the extensive search that had been going on for years, these woods in Palmer had not previously been searched. And the reality is that the area is so dense with wooded areas everywhere, it would have been nearly impossible for searchers to reach all the areas with the resources they had. This is why New England is known for having many people who are listed as missing persons, because their remains have never been found, and there is a high probability that many of them are out in a wooded area somewhere. While they waited for DNA testing on the swimsuit, Dr. Anne-Marie Myers organized a team of searchers to do a grid search. Dr. Myers told 48 Hours that when John Bish arrived to meet her, she shook his hand and said, "Mr. Bish, if your daughter's remains are here, we're going to bring her home to you." So they conducted a painstaking grid search. I watched footage of this, and it was truly incredible given how difficult that terrain was. Searchers were shoulder to shoulder and stepped in unison, raking and looking for any signs of anything. I've seen grid searches before, but I've never seen anything like this. These searches went on daily, and it took nearly 2 weeks, but finally, searchers found a bone. The bone was an arm bone belonging to a person between the ages of 14 to 20. As they continued on for 3 weeks, they continued finding more. They would update the Bishes, whom now suspect this is their daughter, but they don't know for sure. And they're hearing, we found a rib bone or we found this bone. And you can only imagine how agonizing that must have been for them. In all, they found 27 bones and a human skull after searching 35 acres of forest. Where the bones were found were all within a circumference of about 1,000 feet. DNA testing and dental comparisons confirmed that these were in fact the remains of Molly Bish. This area was very remote, and mostly hunters went through these woods, so that led investigators to believe that possibly a hunter familiar with the area put her body there, knowing that there wouldn't be a high likelihood of her being found, at least not for a while. Dr. Myers said the bones being all over the place were indicative that an animal or animals scattered them, and she mentioned a mountain lion. I looked up online to see about a mountain lion in the area or if there are any in Massachusetts, and the DEC says there are not. However, don't come at me, Massachusetts. I live in upstate New York, and everyone in their trail cam says that we have them here too, and they have proof. I don't know. It's possible. Anyways, her thought was, though, that a hunter could have known about a large cat that was in the area, and that from their hunting experience, they knew that if they put a body there, that this animal would scatter the bones. To me, at least, that seems like probably more planning than went into it. I suspect that it's just that he picked it for the seclusion and how low the human traffic was. And big cats or not, there are definitely coyotes, foxes, black bears, raccoons, all sorts of stuff that could have done this. Molly's family was able to lay Molly to rest, and the family released a statement reading, quote, "The Bish family would like to thank everyone for the prayers and continued support throughout the past 3 years. Molly has come home. We are deeply saddened but grateful that we could bring her back home." End quote. Because of the passage of time and exposure to the elements, forensic testing was limited, and those working the case were not hopeful that this would help their investigation into who did this. They were also not able to establish how Molly had been killed, only that there was evidence that pointed to foul play. So likely, the investigation would continue in the way that it had been being worked already, though this time it was officially a homicide investigation. When asked where the investigation stood, Worcester County DA John Conte told the press, quote, "We have suspects, we have evidence, we have 11 people that have failed a lie detector test. I've said we're very close, but yet so far, that's exactly where we are right now. Yesterday I said we have 150 new leads. Well, you can add 50 more to that today. These leads will be put into our computer database." End quote. I don't know if you picked up on what I picked up on, but that is the first mention of failed polygraphs, and 11 is a pretty staggering number. Polygraph tests are a tool and not admissible in court, and they are very controversial on accuracy, but still, 11 is pretty noteworthy. 10 days later, Conte gave another update to the press saying that his team had 7 individuals they were honing in on. He said, quote, "That doesn't mean it's contained wholly to these 7 individuals. We have a great deal of information we think that in one way or another connects them to Molly Bish," end quote. He would not say if the men were considered suspects. He said all but 1 or 2 men were in the original suspect pool. He said some, but not all, were registered sex offenders. None of them were in prison, and that they have DNA evidence from some of them. If right now you're writing this all down, trying to make a little chart, don't worry, I was too. That's kind of how his updates have been for many years. And after this, John Conte kept a low profile with the media for a while. It was actually his reputation to do so throughout his career, though he was commended for his accessibility during the time of the investigation, after the abduction, and up until her remains were found. But after that, his updates were limited for a while, and he would decline media interviews, kind of reverting back to his old ways. Molly's family held funeral services on August 2nd, 2003, what should have been her 20th birthday. The night before, John Bish spent the whole night staying with Molly's casket in their church so that his daughter would not be alone. On the day of the funeral, a limo pulled up and Maggie Bish stepped out holding her daughter's confirmation gown. St. Paul's Cathedral was filled with family, friends, and a community who had grown to know Molly as one of their own. At the graveside service, family and friends were handed tiny boxes to open, and one by one, individual monarch butterflies emerged. They landed on people, the trees, and it was described as this beautiful moment of levity. The Boston Globe titled their piece covering the funeral, "A Day of Grief and Hope." At the funeral, a Bish family friend offered up a prayer saying, "Let us bow our heads in silence for all the missing children who are out in this world. Happy birthday, Molly. In earth and now in heaven, they know who you are." Leads and news seemed to be sparse for the next several months. Then, in May of 2004, Worcester County District Attorney John Conte convened a secret grand jury to review the evidence in the Molly Bish case, following the discovery of her remains the year prior. As part of the process, investigators presented evidence and called witnesses to testify under oath, including some of Molly's friends and others connected to the case. The proceedings were conducted in private, as is standard, and allowed prosecutors to formally preserve witness testimony while evaluating whether the evidence supported any type of criminal charges. Ultimately, no indictments were issued, and officials indicated that the effort was largely used to document and preserve testimony, rather than move forward with prosecution at that time. But just to give you a sense of the timeline, this went on until late 2006, at which point John Conte retired, and shortly thereafter, Joe Early Jr. took over as Worcester County DA. Because this is all sealed, we don't know the full story of who all was involved and what questions were asked, but some of the general sense was that they were re-questioning a lot of Molly's friends because some had given conflicting stories about the morning of Molly's abduction. But it extended far beyond friends. Family was definitely involved, and early reporting estimated that about 100 people would be called upon as witnesses. News of the grand jury got people's hopes up that the case was on the right track. Then, and continuously over the years, the Bish family was kept pretty in the dark, and the DA office has said that no matter who the family is, that's just their approach because they could accidentally say something that could jeopardize the case. This has caused a lot of tension over time because the family has heard repeatedly, "We are close, we're just one lead away." And they are 25 plus years into that nightmare now. For the next part of this episode, I want to tell you about some of the names that came up over the years, who was more of a blip on the radar and the ones that stuck around. In 2005, John Regan's name came up. Now, at this point, police are casting a wide net. When they catch wind of an arrest of someone who seems like they could be capable of committing this type of crime, they want to see if they could have been in or around Warren, Massachusetts in the summer of 2000. And John Regan is someone that piqued their interest. After allegedly attacking a 21-year-old coworker in 2004 and attempting to sexually assault her, his DNA came back as a match to a 1993 sexual assault in a woman's home. In fact, he had been good friends with the husband of this woman, and he wore a mask and disguised his voice so she wouldn't recognize him. He was charged with kidnapping in that case years later, as the statute of limitations had run out on some of the other charges. Unfortunately, he was able to post bail and was out free working as a salesperson while awaiting trial and he drove from Connecticut, where those other assaults took place, and went to Saratoga Springs, New York, a place near the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains and north of Albany, New York. While there, he waited in the parking lot of the high school for a cross-country practice to wrap up, and then he tried to abduct a girl right from the parking lot. He put his hand over her mouth and tried to throw her into the back of his vehicle. He was prepared and had ominous things in his back seat like a tarp and shovel. The high school girl was able to kick him and bite him and get away, and fortunately her coaches stepped in and contained him until he was able to be arrested. John Bish Sr. had a friend in New York who heard of his arrest and passed the name on to John just in case. He then turned it over to police, who looked into John Regan as a suspect, though they never elevated him to that status. Because of some of the sales jobs that John Regan worked at over the years and his travel taking him all over the northeastern United States and New England, there was the chance that he could have been in the area. They couldn't definitively tie him to the area or place him in Warren. And one of the big beliefs about this case is that whoever did this was kind of their home turf. They knew these remote places like Commons Pond and Whiskey Hill. So even if Regan had visited the area, the idea that he wasn't really familiar with these places would make him an unlikely suspect. So law enforcement put him on the back burner. In 2006, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping in the Saratoga Springs case, and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He was sentenced to 15 years for the 93 case, and he was going to be serving those sentences concurrently in New York State. He ended up only serving time until August of 2017, and then he was placed into a secure facility for treatment due to the belief that he would offend again. The next person to discuss is a man named Rodney Stanger. He is someone who came in on a tip, and authorities definitely took interest in him. He has never been elevated to the status of an official suspect in the case, but prior to a 2021 break in the case, he was the longest talked about person in the case on a large scale and amongst the public. One of the things that Molly's case illustrates is that so many people can tick a lot of boxes, but all of them can't be the perpetrator. Rodney definitely ticks a lot of boxes. He lived in the community of Southbridge, 13 miles outside of Warren. He would occasionally fish at Commons Pond. He hunted in the area Molly's remains were found in. Some sources say he had a white vehicle, and others say he had access to one. That I can't confirm for certain. His photo next to the composite is pretty close. He has kind of the bushy mustache, the cold eyes. In his mugshot, which we'll get into more in a minute, he is older looking, but he wasn't arrested until years later for a separate crime. Rodney, for whatever reason, got out of Dodge quick after the abduction. Within a year of Molly going missing, he had packed up after spending decades in Massachusetts and decided to move to Florida. He lived in a trailer home there with his girlfriend, Crystal. In early 2008, Crystal allegedly calls her sister on the phone and starts speaking very cryptically. She alludes to Rodney possibly harming or killing 2 girls up in Massachusetts. And then she randomly asks about her sister's bird, a bird that was named Molly. She then whispers into the phone, "Murder." The call has to end abruptly, and she isn't able to speak anymore about it, then or ever. Just days later, in February of 2008, Rodney Stanger would stab 50-year-old Crystal Morrison to death, and then break into a neighbor's home and attack another occupant. Now, he was questioned about Molly's case in 2008, but he refused to talk about it. When Crystal's sister went down to the trailer to sort through her sister's belongings a few years later, she found an abundance of young girls' hair bows and barrettes, something her sister wouldn't have worn at her age. She was alarmed, and so she contacted authorities in Warren. She also found an old firearms ID card that had been renewed shortly before Molly's murder, and she said the resemblance was striking. Authorities working Molly's case came down and collected evidence themselves, and they attempted to re-question and test DNA relating to Rodney Stanger over the years, but nothing has conclusively ruled him in or out completely. Rodney's ex-wife Deborah spoke out and said he was always terribly abusive and that it took her a long time to escape, but that she finally did. She said he isolated her from her friends, controlled everything she did, and was horrifically violent. She was not surprised whatsoever that he murdered Crystal. The couple had a daughter together whom he abused as well. Deborah remembered the final straw being that one evening when their daughter Nina was just 4 years old, he said that one day he would kill her, and that the next day she fled to a women's shelter and then left the state. Rodney Stanger is currently serving a 25-year sentence in Florida for Crystal's murder. The next person is a man named Gerald Battistoni. He came into focus in 2011 when a private investigator stumbled into information on him that led him to believe he may be responsible for the killings of both Molly and Holly Peranian. I should note that both Gerald and Rodney Stanger are both people who are considered in both cases. Gerald is a bit on the younger side if we're going by the age estimate of the man in the white car seen by Molly Bish. He would have only been 38 when Molly was abducted. Otherwise, like the others, he does bear resemblance to the composite. Of all the people looked at strongly in this case, in my personal opinion, he looks the least like the composite. His second wife was interviewed by the Telegram and Gazette, and she said that on the day of Molly's abduction, he was working on their car, a white Chevy, and that he had taken it for a drive to the Warren area. So, that definitely places him in the area on the day of the crime. In 2011, Gerald was serving a 10 to 12-year prison sentence for a previous sexual assault of a child. Just as a trigger warning, this next part briefly mentions suicide. So after a news article came out discussing his potential involvement with Holly and Molly's murders, he attempted to die by suicide in his cell. Despite how suspicious that is, nothing more has really come of him connecting him to Molly's case. The last person I'll discuss is the most recent one. In 2021, it was announced that a new person of interest had been identified, and I'll get into him after this short break. In June of 2021, more than 2 decades after Molly's abduction and murder, Worcester County DA Joe Early Jr. announced a new person of interest in Molly's case. Francis, who went by Frank Sumner, was a local auto repair shop owner who had an extensive history, including sexual assault and kidnapping. He lived in the area, he was very familiar with the area, and he had access to a white car. Something interesting, and I'll have this photo up on my Instagram, but I noticed this years ago. One of the things I noticed about that composite sketch from 2001, the revamped one, was that Maggie had noticed the guy in the white car was holding the cigarette or cigar in his left hand. I'm not a smoker, but my understanding is that smokers tend to hold the cigarette or cigar in their dominant hand, much like if it was an eating or writing utensil. As a lefty myself, I just notice when people are using their left hand. We see each other in the wild. If you know, you know. So that stood out to me in the revamped composite in 2021. Well, wouldn't you know, there is a photo of Frank Sumner smoking a cigarette, holding it in his left hand, and whoa, it looks a lot like the composite. DA Joe Early Jr. would not get into the details of why they connected Sumner to the case, just that new leads had come in and they had connected some dots. Unfortunately, Sumner died in 2016, so if he is the killer, he won't have to answer for his crimes here on Earth. You've heard me discuss DNA throughout this episode, and I haven't been specific because I can't be. Authorities investigating will not share what they have. They just say that they have been testing evidence, things found around the scene, things found where Molly's remains were found, but we don't know what exactly. All I can say is that there are 80 plus bins of just case file information in Molly's case and multiple bins in a DNA storage area of random items of hers. When they went to do DNA comparison for Frank Sumner, they ran into a bit of a problem because Sumner had been cremated, and despite his criminal history, his DNA was not in CODIS. Obviously, the Bish family, they were frustrated with this, understandably, and they felt that someone had dropped the ball. But they weren't giving up that easily. Authorities tracked down Sumner's son, Frank Sumner Jr., who was in an Ohio prison serving time for robbery, and then they collected his DNA. And the results? Inconclusive. And they will not elaborate any more at this time, so that's largely where this case has left off. Molly's sister Heather has taken to TikTok to share Molly with all of us and push for answers. She is incredible on there. Go give her a follow. She's just an amazing advocate for her sister, and she took the helm as the spokesperson for her family as her parents began to age and experience some health issues. The Bish family has done so much for their community and to honor Molly's legacy. As of the last couple of years, there is a fresh investigator on the case, and she said she will not quit until she gets answers and solves Molly's case. If you have any information on the 2000 abduction and murder of Molly Bish, please contact her tip line at 508-453-7575. To end this episode, I want to share a quote from Molly's sister Heather that I think sums up so much of this case. She says, quote, "One way or another, I will find out who the person is, whether it's science or a podcast, or if I have to scream from every mountaintop in this country, I will do that. I'm certain that I will find out who this person is. There's no victory here. There's no happiness. There's no relief. There's never going to be. My sister's still dead, and somebody really hurt her, and they did some egregious acts to her, and I think the work and the commitment and the objective now is to really talk about these things. Before all of this, before I took on this investigation, before my sister disappeared, I didn't know. I thought there was always just one bad guy that killed all these people, or one bad guy that did all the bad things, and he was just a bad apple. I thought people were mostly good, and I didn't realize how many people are products of sexual abuse and physical abuse, and after they're the victim, they become the perpetrator oftentimes, and that scares me and saddens me because it's very hard to be angry at someone who was also a victim. I think we have to dig deeper and look at why. Why is this happening? Why are so many people sexually and physically abusive? Why is the number 4 cause of death for women men? This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you wish to and are able to support the podcast monetarily, you can do so by joining my Spreaker Supporters Club, where all episodes are ad-free when you log in to the app or platform. You can find the link at the bottom of the show notes. Follow me on Instagram to connect with me and other listeners and see photos in each case. You can also DM me case suggestions there or email me at simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and join me again next Monday.